Welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce, episode 39. I am your host, Leanne Linsky.
And I'm the boyfriend.
We're back with our 39th episode, and we're really excited about that.
We didn't go anywhere.
I know.
So why do you keep saying we're back?
From last week.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we're back from last week.
In case it's been a day or two since you tuned in. And while you are tuning in, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe. Unless you're driving, of course, because that would be unsafe.
Our listeners are smarter than that. They know not to do those things.
That's a PSA for anybody who's new.
Yeah.
Hey, but when you do get to your computer, or if you're already at your desk and you want to get a jump start on your holiday shopping, make sure you check out lifelaughterdivorce.com, click on retail therapy, and see what you need to get for your friends and family. Good stuff.
How was that again?
I have to sing that all over again?
Yes, you do.
Today is Sing Everything You Say Day. Actually, one of my old bosses actually made me used to sing everything during the workday. We used to have to sing everything to each other.
Did you work at a kid's clothing store or something?
No, it was an accounting department. Go figure. So hey, let's talk about today, shall we?
Sure. What do we got going on today?
Well, today I want to talk about the way that tradition and religion, more specifically, influences your decision on divorce.
That's a deep subject.
Yeah, it's a very deep subject.
And I'm going to guess, because of the statistics that are out there, that previous generations or older generations, probably our generation and our parents, are more religious than the current generations, because religion is
phasing out.
I wouldn't go phasing out, but there are less people that are.
Yes, it's true though.
There are less people that are diehard religion people. So, and I don't know what, that's probably a bad way to put it, but
maybe phasing out is a better way of saying it.
Maybe it is.
Yes. So yeah, it is interesting, and it probably is. I know that for like older people that I know older people that are divorced too, so it's hard to say. But
certain religions definitely frown upon it.
Absolutely, as we've heard from many of our guests in the past.
And if you're a devout person of that faith, then you may have a difficulty with that decision.
Yeah, of course, because most religions, believe in the sanctity
sure
of a marriage. And if you say vows, your vows are made for life, unless, of course, as we talked a few episodes ago, where in other countries you can actually do a pact, which is more of a legal alternative. But not everybody has heard of that, and it's not as common.
It's interesting how our country has basically tied religion and marriage all together in sort of one package.
And you would think our country is more progressive than any other country.
You would think that, but it's actually
not.
No.
Yeah.
Because religion plays a big role in the definition of marriage. It's been difficult for our country to accept alternative types of marriages. And that's finally now starting to creep into the politics, into the law of our country, but still they're interconnected.
Yeah, it's harder for, I think, religions to be more inclusive rather than exclusive when it comes to marriage.
No, I agree, but that's actually tied into our laws.
Yeah. Yes. There's definitely.
Whereas in other countries, I don't think it's as intertwined or as tightly intertwined as it is here.
Right. And it's just so strange to me that in a country that's supposed to be so forward thinking and so advanced in so many other ways, that
that's what they tell us. But when you actually look at the numbers,
we're not. Right. So yeah. And one of the things we haven't had on the podcast yet is a parent of a divorcee.
We have you said 39 episodes. We went through 39 episodes and haven't had a parent of a divorcee?
No, we've had children of divorcees. We've had divorcees. We've had friends of divorcees, family members, but never a parent of a divorcee.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting because then based upon our current conversation, parents may have a different take on divorce versus where the younger child may be more accepting of it.
Right. Absolutely. And the other thing that is I'm curious to hear from our guests today is their acceptance of it or their thoughts about it, because if they haven't experienced it themselves, is it hard to get a grasp on why their child might be going through this process that they've never had to experience because they've always found a way to work it out.
One thing that was interesting from our guest, because I did take part in the interview this time.
Yeah, you did.
Yes, is that the guest indicated that the child had trouble making her decision for divorce because of the parents' beliefs.
Right. And I do think that, from my own experience especially, is that does play a part in the decision making, because that's who raised us. That's who gave us our core values. So of course that's going to
So did you talk to your parents about it? And did you?
I did. And I had a lot of guilt I felt over it.
Really?
I did. Yeah. It was a very hard decision because, nobody else in my family at the time was divorced, and in my immediate family. And yeah, my parents have been together forever and will most likely be that way. So I felt I had done something wrong. That wasn't, I was always raised that's forever. Those things are sacred. Those, that matters. And then you work things out because that's what I had experienced and seen all my life. So that was the norm. And then to go through it on a different way of it, that was very hard to understand myself, let alone have to explain it to family members who didn't.
Yeah, and family members who have remained married and don't understand that experience or don't know why you would do that. So
because I'm doing something they've never done, and I'm not able to do something that they can.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's challenging. So yeah, today's guest was a very interesting interview because it gives us a completely flip side perspective of the same kind of scenario. So our guest today is Anne, and Anne's last name is going to be anonymous, but it was so nice to have Anne on here and give her own experience of going through it with her daughter. And I'll let her tell the story and share the experience. So without further ado, Anne Anonymous. And welcome to Life, Laughter, Divorce podcast. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Hi, Leanne. How are you today?
I'm good, boyfriend. You okay over there?
I'm all right.
All right. Oh, I know Anne and I have been being silly before we started recording.
Nah.
Oh, well, it's good to have you here because we have yet to have had
spit it out. Come on, you can get it out.
For me to say, we have not yet had a parent of a divorcee on the podcast. So this is good.
It's different.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm curious as to what you'll have to say. So we will usually start with a little bit about yourself, and you've been married for a long time. How many years have you been married?
45 years.
45 years.
Wow.
Holy cow.
That's a long time. That's a long time.
Yeah.
That's what I say every day.
So no divorces, no. You've been married to the same guy for
Married from the same guy for 45 years. No divorces. Nope. Same person.
So and you've had and how many children do you have?
I have two, one boy and one girl.
And are both divorced or just one?
Just one. One's never been married. The gentleman has never been married.
I see. And so, your
So daughter.
daughter has been divorced one time?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Well, not great, but okay. So do you want to tell us a little bit first about maybe, so you've been married for 45 years, and have you ever come close to divorce?
Yes. A couple times.
Really?
When sometimes the conflicts get to the point where you forget to communicate. And so when you don't communicate, then your anger builds up. And so then you can go one way or the other. And you have to step back and look at it and say, okay, what's important? And for me, it's communication. And so when you open up and finally communicate what the problems are, then you can seem to either resolve them or compromise.
Or get divorced.
No, compromise.
Okay.
Boyfriend and I have talked about this quite a bit on the podcast, and it always seems to come down to communication for so many things.
Absolutely.
And so when before, so you've obviously had hard times in marriage. I mean, with 45 years with somebody, obviously you're going to have times where you agree or you don't agree. But do you find that as you go through those years that it gets easier to communicate?
Well, I would say that the first couple years you're in that the newlywed stage. And then as you grow into the second stage of, oh God, I got to go pick up his socks, or I've got to do this or do that. You get this little bit of a, I feel like I'm your mother type deal. And so then you go past that. And of course, then when children come around, that's where you really got to compromise, because your children are the most important. In my book, the children are the most important thing that you have. And so then you have the goal of building a relationship that's going to help your kids. And with my husband and I, we were very fortunate that we always had that same goal of bringing up our children, at least having one parent being at home, and also just being there for them. And sometimes you're not, and sometimes you are, but in the long run, it still comes down to communication and how you're going to be able to raise your kids and still have a life of your own. And so we always had vacations with the children, and then we had vacations without the children, and then we had vacations without each other, and it worked out real well.
So now that you've have that own perspective of how your marriage worked, how did you take the fact that your daughter got divorced? How did that hit you and your husband? Because obviously you have what appears as if you have a belief in the sanctity of marriage, and you have vows, so therefore you don't break those vows. And now you see that your daughter did. How did that affect you, or how did you go about that? Did that affect your relationship with your daughter and you personally, or you personally?
No, it didn't affect the relationship with my daughter. And I was very fortunate that I had my son explain to me a few things about, do you want your daughter to be happy? Yes, I believe that once you're married, you should be married and stay married. Being a Catholic, you have those vows and you take those vows very seriously. My daughter, she got married, and I really didn't want her to get married because she was marrying a military man that was getting ready to go to the war. And this was back in 2001. And I didn't feel that they should get married, but they wanted to, and they felt very strong with it. So they went ahead and they got married. And so when he went off to war and came back, and he was gone so much that the marriage just kind of crumbled. And every time he came back home, he was a different person. And my daughter really tried to make that work. And I think she tried to make it work because of me and my beliefs. But when my son said, Mom, is this what you really think that my sister needs? And when I got to really thinking about it and soul searching, it wasn't what I wanted her to be. And yes, it was very hard for me because nobody in my family, my husband's family, has ever gotten a divorce. And so it was a first for us. And the sanctity of the vows was broken. But then reality checks came in and said, okay, if it was broken, then, and you can't fix it, then it's time to move on. And so that was the turning point for me.
Yeah. So this is, nobody in your family has ever gone through divorce.
No.
So this was totally new to everybody.
Yes.
Did you find that did you talk to other people in the family and how it affected them, or did nobody talk about it?
My husband and I did. And my husband was one that even was, she can't live that way. And I had to.
What do you mean? As a divorcee, or can't live in the marriage that she was in?
In the marriage that she was in.
Okay.
And there was no children involved. So it was one of those things where she can step back, and she was always trying to make it work. And I had to commend her for that, but it didn't work. And she was very unhappy. And so it was kind of like, okay, you either have to suck it up and say, okay, it's time to throw the towel in. And I supported her in everything that she needed. And so when it came to the divorce, we supported her for that. But it was hard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I would imagine it's very hard, especially being raised Catholic. And, I was also raised Catholic, so I understand where you're coming from.
But not having any divorce in the family or anything, and no experience with it, and this one being the first, that could be a difficult hurdle to manage it, to get over.
To find some understanding.
Right.
Yeah.
And I agree with that. And so it's where you have to really feel what's best for your children, and you have to say to yourself, just because I felt very strong against divorce at that particular time, but I also had to open my eyes and look at what was best for her, and the best solution was for her to get the divorce.
Yeah. Would you feel like if now if you were to encounter divorce either with another family member, or even her again, would your response to it be different now that you've experienced it this one time?
No. I still feel that if you're going to take those vows, I feel like that a lot of people, individuals, they get married and they look at it and say, well, I can get divorced tomorrow. And so the idea of being married is not like it used to be. When we have five individual couples that we have through our married life that are still married. And I mean, they've been married 45 years, 46 years, 42 years. And it's you want that for your kids. But at the same time, I don't want them to jump into bed, and say, oh, I'm going to get married. And then 3 weeks later, they're going to get a divorce, or 10 weeks, or whatever, because marriage to me is a very, I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, but it's very sacred.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I believe it or not, I'm to that point in my life that I'm saying, why don't you just live with the person? Don't get married. And then when you guys decide that this is the right thing for you, then make that step.
Mm-hmm. Right.
But don't just get married because you're getting married, and then down the road you're going to get a divorce, because it doesn't mean anything.
What do you think has changed between, like, you have many friends that are married as long as you've been. What do you think has changed over the years that maybe the younger generation isn't?
I think it's commitment. I really feel that it's commitment. I feel a lot of the younger individuals are not committed to a partnership or a relationship, And they look at it as, they just shrug their shoulders and, well, if it doesn't work, I can always leave. And so they don't make an effort to work at it and make something out of their marriage. And then when there's children involved, it's more important to work at it and communicate and resolve the issues that you have in hand, and try to make that relationship work.
Do you think it has something to do with the changes in societal norms? Like, my mom at one time had said she thought she's seen a shift. She started to see a shift in marriages and family when women went to work and started getting careers, and she said she noticed a shift among her friends as they started to go to work and things changed in their household and the dynamics of the family changed. And she often wonders if that's it, or thinks that it's a giant contributor to the way the family dynamics have changed. Do you think that maybe that is something that...
I think part of that is true. Women are more independent. Women want a career. But you can't have both. I'm very independent, and I have my own career, and I still make time for my family because that's very important to me. So it's what the priorities are. If your priorities is in your job and you want to be the top of whatever, then I think some things like family and relationships go on the back burner. And because you're trying to make that goal in your life to be the top one or whatever. And so that, yes, I do believe that can be an issue. I do.
Yeah. What would you for someone, if your daughter or somebody else were to come to you and ask for advice on how to make a marriage work, what would you say, like the top, you mentioned communication obviously is key, but are there like 3 things that come to mind that are like really stick out to you?
The first thing is you got to learn to compromise. If you can't compromise, then if it's all me, then what's the point? Because now you have 2 people or whatever. And it's more than 2 people because you got his family, you got your family. So there's dynamics in there and you have to work out those dynamics. So I would say compromise is a very good thing. Number 2 is having full trust. You have to have trust. If you don't have the trust in your partner, it's not going to work. And then, like I said, also, I feel very, very strongly about communication.
Yeah. And you had also mentioned, kind of going back a minute, one of the things you stuck out, you had said like you had a career of your own and you are a very independent person. How is it that, to your point, if you put everything else first, obviously that's going to be very hard in any relationship if the relationship isn't number one. But what are some of the things that kind of kept you on track when it came to your family and your kids and making sure you kept those priorities? I mean, were there any time where sometimes your job was
Yes,
you?
there was many times that my job was more important, that I had to put my family to the side for a little bit, but I've always came back to my family because my family is very important to me. My children, my husband, my extended family, and support. They're my support system. And so I always came back to that. And I think if you put everything in perspective, a job's a job.
Yeah.
And if you always say yes, because I always say this, if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, somebody would step in and take my place. But if I got hit by a bus tomorrow, no one's going to be able to step into my place to be a mom and a spouse and a lover and a friend. That's my role in the whole dynamics of everything. So I always keep that in mind. Yes, I love my job. I want to be good at my job. But I also, my priority is that I want to be the best mom that I can and to be able to, you know, show the kids that it's okay to work, but there's also a time that you need to step back and say, my family's important too.
Yeah. Do you think that since, you know, since your daughter has experienced a divorce, which is something that you haven't experienced, you know, like I know with my parents, they've been together forever as well. And I'm the only, for a while, I was the only kid who had gone through a divorce. Did you find that sometimes it's hard to relate when it comes to relationships like that? Or did you find that it brought you closer together in some respects with your daughter? You know, when it came time to talk about that, did you find it hard?
Yes, at first. Part of me wanted to talk to my daughter and find out how she felt about things. But I'm a kind of a person, I don't like to pry. So I always let the kids, when they're ready, they will talk to me, and they generally do. And so it was kind of, when she went through the divorce, I was there for her. She knew I was there for her. And I, said I would call her and touch base with her and talk with her. But then it was her, to me, it was her responsibility to, when she was ready, to talk to me and tell me how she felt. Because, sometimes if you push and push and push, they're going to back away and they're going to run away.
Yeah.
So you have to let them make that decision. And also when they're ready, they can communicate what their needs are.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
So it's been, so you said your daughter was married in the early 2000s. So she's been through the divorce and has moved on since?
Yes, she remarried, and she has a beautiful young baby boy. He's a year old now, and she seems to be happy. She's the best mom that I've ever encountered.
So from a mom's perspective, how do you think the divorce affected her and her next relationship?
I think part of that is she's always looking behind to make sure that the mistakes are not being made. I think sometimes she's overcompensating to make herself be a little bit better than what she was before, even though I felt that the relationship that she had prior had nothing to do with her. It was the situation that they were in. But part of her is a trust factor. She's always looking and making sure or questioning the trust factor in her relationship.
I think that's pretty normal. Considering going through 2 divorces myself, I tend to, ever since then, check, always second guess my choices. Like, is this the right thing? Is this a trustworthy situation? Because being, through it once, surely you don't want to be through it twice. I certainly don't want to be through it a third time. But I think in most people I talk to that have gone through the experience, I think that's a fear is, boy, I don't want to do that again.
But I think that happens with any relationship.
Yeah.
It doesn't necessarily need to be divorce. I look back at the old relationships I have and I'm like, all right, those ended because of XYZ.
Yeah.
I don't want to do XYZ again.
Right.
Let's find something different. So I think it's human nature.
Absolutely.
And I agree.
And with divorce, I mean, I've talked about this with people. There's something about it. It's one thing to go through relationships, and I mean, relationships are devastating when they end. So I'm not discounting that, but there is something different about going through an actual divorce as a process. It's a bit of a different grieving process because everything has to suddenly be untangled. It's not just like we're done and you move on. Not that you necessarily just move on with the relationship, but there's all these things intertwined.
Right.
And it's legal, and there's a lot it's a whole different process to get out of, and it's a lot of unknowns. And I think that's where, you know, suddenly you have to be thinking with your head and not your heart. And it's very messy and devastating in that way. And I find that a lot of times going through other relationships and getting serious with somebody is scary because it's like, oh, I remember feeling like this before and then everything blew up in my face and I don't want that to happen again. So yeah, it's very scary. And especially too, you know, having parents and listening to you and this, and it's good for me to hear because, you know, talking to my own parents is one thing who've been married for many, many years, but I realize it's got to be so hard to understand what's happening. And, you know, all of their friends remained married, right? So this is a whole new world happening. And you know, talking to my mom many times, she's like it's a throwaway society and you can just kind of walk away.
Yep.
That was my mom voice. It's a throwaway. But I hear her voice a lot of times. And in that, you know, it's almost like this little voice in my head is like, you know, it should be working out. Don't go to bed angry. Do these things. But it didn't work for me. And there's a thing of guilt there, you know, because we were raised differently.
Yeah.
And so that goes with it too.
And part of, you know, like with and when you go back and look at your family relationship, you don't ever want to make the mistakes that your parents have made. And I'm thinking that some of the times your children don't want to make the same mistakes that we have made. And so the dynamics is a tug war, a pull and tug thing. And another thing is that there's another family out there that got severed because of the divorce. And so when it's just not the two kids getting divorced, it's the families that are getting divorced. And it really hurts. But at the same time, you've got to make sure that you're doing what's right for you. And it doesn't make any difference how I feel, even though my heart is saying one thing and my head's saying another, but it's what's right for her. And the divorce was the right thing for her to do. And I had to support her on that.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And that's nice that you could. And we've talked to many guests who speaking of doing the opposite, not wanting to do what your parents do. We had a guest a few weeks ago Samantha, who talked about she wanted to do the opposite of her parents, and her mother had been divorced many times. And so she purposely stayed with somebody for a long period of time just to do the opposite. So I think that we do tend to do stuff like that. It's like you want to make a big change.
Well, you try to learn from other people, and for Samantha's case, she saw that her mom was doing things that she didn't approve of, so she wanted to do something different. So she's trying to learn from the people around her, and not make those same mistakes. Either whichever direction is, not to get divorced or to get divorced, whatever. It's try not to make those mistakes, and that's where we're at, and that's how we get better as a people, is trying to learn from everybody's mistakes and move forward from it.
But the key, like you said, the key word though is trying to learn from other people's mistakes and learn from your mistakes to make it better. And sometimes people don't learn from their mistakes.
Well, there's some idiots out there.
and you know, I mean, I've got some people that I know, they've been married 7 or 8 times, and it's like, God, haven't you learned yet? You know? And so it's, I don't know, you know, like your parents said, you know, it's a throwaway society. But I feel that knowledge is a wonderful thing. You got to have the knowledge and also trust your instincts and learn. You know, just learn
something from it. And you know, I often wonder, as parents, you obviously, when this happens to your kids, you talk about it between each other. Did this ever, when you talk about it with your husband, did it ever bring you closer as a result? Or what did you learn as a couple?
I have to think about this for a minute. Being a couple that we know people that had divorces and stuff like that. My best girlfriend had a divorce, and you just it's I don't know. My husband and I were just we just didn't believe in divorce at that time, and so we, with the help of our son, I mean, he showed us the way that divorce is not all that bad. It's just the nature of the beast. And so you have to open your mind and open your eyes and be receptive. And if you're closed-minded and you're not receptive, then you're going to have that really hurt anger feeling. And I've never had that. I've always, once I figured things out, I opened my mind, and I just accepted. And as far as my husband went, he was accepted before I was, which was,
Really?
yeah, he was more receptive.
Did you two talk about it openly together?
Yeah.
About it?
Yeah. We talked about it a lot, and he put, when her husband had left, the first husband had left, and then he come back, and he left, and he came back. I mean, you can see that a little piece of him was just taken away, and no woman should ever have to go through an abusive relationship, and that was the turning point when I found out what he was hurting her mentally and physically. And I never wanted that with my kids. And I had parents that were married 50 some 60 years, but they were abusive to each other. And I never wanted that for my kids. And I was looking at that saying, well, my daughter is living that life right now. And I didn't want that to happen to her. So and she would not take that step to get a divorce until I said it was okay, because she knew how I felt. And I finally just looked at her and I said, you do what you have to do, because there's no way that a woman should ever be abused. And so that was my turning point. And I still feel that very strongly. If no woman should ever be abused by anybody. And so, yeah.
Yeah. Definitely. So, do you have any other thoughts for anyone who's out there maybe getting a divorce or going through a divorce at this time and maybe don't have that support or understanding from a parent?
There's always a friend. There's always, I'm not that religious anymore. I believe in, there's a power out there, but to me is find somebody that you can talk to, a support group, whatever you can find, because if you keep it bottled up inside, it's going to eat you alive. Mm-hmm. And so you've got to share your feelings, and get it out and try to heal from the inside out. And it's not wrong to have a divorce. It's not, that's a choice that you make. And like I said, there's support groups out there. There's pastors. There's friends. There's things out there that go out and talk to somebody and get those issues resolved so you can go forward.
Yeah.
Because life's too short.
Well, it was so good talking to you today, and we really appreciate you coming in and sharing with us. And I know it's not easy being a parent I don't know from firsthand experience, but I know from my own parents' experience, it can't be easy.
Yeah, I can just imagine what your parents say about you.
Well, we might have to find out soon. But this is really helpful, and I'm sure there's a lot of our listeners out there who really appreciate your words, and this will help them through their own process. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.